Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. We take your sources and we try to get to the heart of what's really fascinating about them. Today, we're going to be exploring the city of Kashi, also known as Varanasi, a city so steeped in history and spirituality that it's said to exist beyond time itself.
And what better way to explore a timeless city than through maps? But we're not talking about your average street guides.
Right.
We're going to be looking at religious picture maps, vibrant, artistic representations that blend geography, mythology, and religious significance into really a unique portrait of Kashi as a sacred space.
So we've got articles tracing the evolution of these maps. We've got excerpts from ancient Hindu texts, like the Koshank. We even have some modern examples. It's a lot to unpack, but the big question that I think we're going to be grappling with is this. How do these maps, spanning centuries, reflect that tension between Kashi's mythical image as an eternal city and the very real lived experiences of the people who shaped it?
It's a fascinating paradox, trying to capture eternity on a piece of cloth or paper.
Yeah. It's like trying to fit the ocean into a teacup.
Yeah.
But before we get lost in metaphors, let's ground ourselves in the basics. What exactly is this idea of Kashi as the eternal city?
In Hindu mythology, Kashi is believed to be untouched by time and destruction. It's said to rest upon the trident of Lord Shiva, the destroyer and regenerator, which means it would survive even the eventual destruction of the earth itself.
Wow. Talk about divine protection. And the Kashi really emphasizes this idea of Kashi being in a league of its own.
Absolutely. There's a passage that states that Kashi shouldn't even be compared to other cities on Earth. It transcends them entirely, existing on a cosmic plane created by Shiva himself.
Yeah.
It's not just a city. It's a principle. It's an embodiment of divine power and permanence.
Okay. So we've got this incredibly powerful concept of an eternal city, a place beyond time.
Right.
And then we have these picture maps called paya, meaning cloth, emerging as a way to visualize this sacred geography.
Right. And these pots don't just show us landmarks. They depict intricate pilgrimage routes, the location of significant temples, the flow of the sacred Ganges River. They even include these mythical elements, like rivers that exist only in mythology.
It's like they're creating a visual map of belief itself.
Yes.
Overlaid onto the physical city.
That's a great way to put it.
Here's what really struck me.
Yeah.
These maps began to flourish during times of great change and rebuilding in Kashi. Why do you think that is?
Well, you have to imagine the psychological impact on people, Your city, the city that you believe to be eternal, suffers damage or invasion, the upheaval of history.
Right.
And suddenly these maps become a powerful act of defiance. It's a visual declaration that Kerr's true essence, its spiritual core, cannot be touched.
Almost like they're saying, yes, buildings may crumble, empires may fall, but Ka's sacred identity endures.
Exactly. They're reaffirming that connection to the divine, to the eternal, in the face of these very real temporal challenges.
So let's take a closer look at one of these early maps, the one housed in the Victoria and Albert Museum.
Okay.
It's strikingly different from what we might expect. There are no identifying names. There are no profane structures, like houses or markets. It's all about the symbolic representation of sacred spaces.
And notice what's at the very center, the Kashi Vivanath temple complex, dedicated to Lord Shiva.
But isn't that a bit ironic? This temple dedicated to the god of destruction, at the heart of a city that is meant to be eternal.
It might seem like a contradiction, but it actually makes perfect sense within Hindu cosmology. Shiva is not just a destroyer, he's also a regenerator. Destruction is a necessary part of creation.
Right.
And so by placing the Kashi Vivanath temple at the center, the map makers are emphasizing that even destruction is ultimately part of Kashi's eternal cycle.
So it's not about denying destruction, but about incorporating it into the very fabric of eternity.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And this temple has a rather tumultuous history, right?
It does, yeah.
It's been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times,
Yes.
often a focal point of conflict. What's fascinating here is that this particular map likely emerged during one of those periods of tension.
It did.
Possibly even while the temple was being rebuilt.
Yeah, quite possibly.
So maybe it wasn't just about reflecting the sacred geography, it was about making a statement, a visual declaration that, yes, our temple was destroyed, but our faith remains. Kayi endured.
Imagine it in a time of uncertainty and change. This map becomes a powerful symbol of resilience, a visual testament to the enduring power of faith and tradition.
It's a reminder that even in the face of adversity, even when the physical city is in turmoil, the belief in Kashi's eternal sanctity remains unshaken.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It really is fascinating how these maps become so much more than just guides for navigating the city.
Yeah.
They become these tools, for processing trauma and reaffirming identity,
Right.
and weaving this narrative of resilience and continuity in the face of all this disruption and upheaval.
Speaking of different narratives, let's look at this other map, the one from the Delhi National Museum.
Okay.
It was created in Malwar, a region far from Kashi. And visually, it's like a complete 180 from the Victorian Albert map.
Oh, wow.
This one is like bursting with life, almost playful in its detail.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, isn't it? That previous map was so stark and symbolic.
Right.
And this one is just teeming with all these figures, gods, ascetics, pilgrims.
Yeah.
We even see the Yamuna River, which is typically associated with another city altogether, flowing alongside the Ganges.
It's like a Where's Waldo of Hindu mythology.
I love that analogy.
But seriously, what do you make of this shift in tone? It's such a far cry from that starkness of the previous map.
Well, it seems to be presenting a different facet of Kashi's eternity.
Okay.
Not so much its resilience against destruction, but this capacity to embrace and harmonize such diverse beliefs and practices. And notice how there's no sense of conflict here. There's no claims being staked. It's just this idealized vision of pilgrimage, a place where all these different aspects of Hinduism can coexist peacefully along the sacred river.
So if that first map was about asserting dominance, this one feels like an invitation.
Exactly. And consider this, the map was likely created by an artist who had never even been to Kashi.
Really? So it's a vision of Kashi filtered through, like, imagination and devotion rather than direct experience.
Precisely. And that speaks to the power of belief and longing to shape our perception of a place, even a place we may have never physically encountered.
Okay, so we've seen two very different interpretations of Kashi's eternity. One focused on resilience against destruction,
Right.
and the other on inclusivity and harmony. So let's fast forward a bit to the later picture maps,
Okay.
like the Kashi the Darpan from the late 19th century. These maps seem to be grappling with a new challenge, modernity.
Absolutely. You're right.
Yeah.
This is a period when Kashi, like much of India, is undergoing rapid modernization under British rule.
Right.
And you really see that tension reflected in these maps.
Because now they're starting to incorporate elements of the actual physical city, recognizable buildings, streets, even the railway line, right alongside those traditional mythical representations.
Right.
It's almost like they're trying to reconcile two different worlds.
Exactly. It's as if they're saying, look, the myth is still alive and well, but it's also adapting, evolving, finding a place for itself within this changing landscape.
It's a fascinating shift. It's almost like a visual argument for Kashi's continued relevance in a world that's increasingly focused on the tangible and the modern.
Yes, grounding eternity in the present moment.
Yeah.
Showing that the sacred and the secular can coexist, even intertwine.
Okay, so we've gone from asserting power to showcasing harmony to integrating the modern. So what about those contemporary picture maps, the ones being created today?
Well, those traditional paya, the ones painted on cloth, might be less common now.
Right.
But that impulse to visually represent Kash sacred geography is still very much alive. It's just taking on all these new forms.
Like what? Give us some examples. What are modern map makers doing?
Well, we're seeing a rise in all these digital and multimedia representations. Think interactive maps, 3D models. You can even take virtual reality tours of Kashi these days.
Wow.
There's even a project using drone footage to capture the city from these completely new angles.
That's incredible.
It is.
So instead of those hand-painted scrolls, pilgrims might be using their smartphones or tablets to navigate Kashi's sacred geography.
Exactly. And these new technologies offer some exciting possibilities for experiencing Kashi.
Yeah.
Imagine a virtual reality experience that allows you to walk through the streets, visit the temples, even witness the rituals and ceremonies along the Ganges Ghats.
It's like merging the mythical and the modern in a whole new way.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it raises some really interesting questions about how technology is shaping not only how we experience sacred spaces,
Right.
but also how those spaces are preserved, interpreted, and even redefined for future generations.
Speaking of reinterpreting sacred space, let's talk about the Kashi Vishwanath Corridor project.
Okay.
It was this massive undertaking aimed at revitalizing the area around the Kashi Vishwanath temple. They cleared all these congested lanes, acquired properties, even demolished some structures to create this wider, more accessible pathway from the temple to the Ganges.
This project really embodies that tension we've been discussing.
Right.
This push and pull between tradition and modernity, between preserving the past and adapting to the present.
And it wasn't without its controversy, right?
It wasn't, no.
Some people saw it as this necessary modernization effort, making the area more accessible to pilgrims and tourists. Others criticize it for disrupting the traditional character of the area, displacing residents and businesses, altering that unique atmosphere that had developed organically over centuries.
You hit the nail on the head. It raises the question, is this project reshaping eternity, or is it simply revealing another layer? Because one of the most interesting outcomes of the project was the rediscovery of several smaller temples that had been hidden or encroached upon over time.
It's like suddenly finding missing pieces of a puzzle.
It is.
And then trying to figure out where they fit into the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that process of integration or reinterpretation is ongoing. It's a conversation happening between religious authorities, local communities, archaeologists, historians.
Wow.
Even the pilgrims themselves. They're all contributing to this evolving narrative of Kashi's sacred geography.
It really highlights that dynamic nature of this eternal city, doesn't it?
It does.
It's not static, frozen in time. It's constantly evolving, adapting, reinterpreting itself in response to new challenges and opportunities.
And these picture maps in all their various forms offer us a fascinating glimpse into that ongoing process.
Yeah. Okay, before we wrap up, I want to bring things back to a more human scale. You know, we've been talking a lot about maps and temples and grand ideas, but what about the everyday experience of pilgrimage? What was it actually like for someone traveling to Kashi using one of these maps?
Well, imagine yourself as a pilgrim arriving in Kashi for the first time. You've probably traveled a long distance, maybe even on foot. You're likely overwhelmed by the sheer scale and complexity of the city, the crowds, the narrow lanes, the countless temples, the constant activity along the Ganges.
Definitely not your typical vacation destination.
Not at all. And that's where these Paya maps served as more than just guides.
Okay.
They were lifelines. They helped pilgrims orient themselves in this unfamiliar and often chaotic environment, understand the spatial layout of the city's sacred geography, plan their pilgrimage routes, and identify the most important temples and shrines to visit.
So they were like spiritual GPS systems, helping pilgrims navigate not only the physical city, but also the complexities of its religious landscape.
Exactly, but they were more than just navigational tools. They also provided a visual narrative, depicting the mythological stories associated with different sites and illustrating the rituals and practices that pilgrims could perform. They helped connect the dots, so to speak, between the physical location and its deeper spiritual significance.
So it wasn't just about getting from point A to point B, it was about understanding the deeper meaning and significance of each step along the way.
Precisely. And by visualizing these stories and rituals, the maps helped pilgrims engage with the city on a more profound, more experiential level. They transformed the act of pilgrimage from a physical journey into an immersive, multisensory encounter with the sacred.
That's fascinating. It's like the maps themselves became part of the sacred landscape, guiding and inspiring pilgrims on their spiritual quests.
Yeah, it really highlights the power of these maps, doesn't it? They weren't just tools for navigation, they were tools for for connecting with that deeper meaning and purpose of pilgrimage. Absolutely. They bridged that gap between the physical and the spiritual, the tangible and the intangible. And that's something that's consistently fascinating about these pa. They were commissioned by rulers, wealthy patrons, even everyday devotees.
So they weren't just personal devotional objects. They were also used to promote Kashi's importance.
Precisely, these maps would have circulated widely, reaching audiences far beyond Kashi itself. They were like visual advertisements, showcasing the city's sacred geography, highlighting its mythological significance, and emphasizing the grandeur of its temples.
I can see how they would have been incredibly effective. Imagine seeing one of these intricate maps for the first time. It would have sparked curiosity, inspired awe, maybe even a yearning to experience Kashi firsthand.
Exactly. They helped solidify Kashi's reputation as a premier pilgrimage destination, a place where one could connect with the divine, earn merit, and perhaps even achieve liberation.
But as we've been discussing, those maps are also products of their time, reflecting the perspectives and priorities of their creators. Earlier, you mentioned that some map makers might have had their own agendas. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
We'll take the map we discussed from the Victoria and Albert Museum. The one that focuses so intently on the Dashashwamedh temple. It was likely created during a time of conflict, when control of the temple was contested.
So the placement of the temple at the very center of the map wasn't just a coincidence. It was a deliberate statement about its importance, maybe even a subtle assertion of Hindu claims to the site.
It's a very plausible interpretation. It's a visual declaration of this is ours, this is sacred to us, and it will endure.
While that Mewar map, with its diverse array of deities and pilgrimage routes, might reflect a different agenda, maybe a desire to promote unity and inclusivity within Hinduism.
Yes, it's showcasing Ka as a place where all these different traditions can coexist, where there's room for multiple interpretations and expressions of faith.
It's a reminder that these maps, while beautiful and evocative, aren't neutral representations of reality. They're filtered through the lens of belief, politics, and cultural values.
Precisely, and that makes them even more fascinating to study, because they offer us this window into how people at different times and places understood and interacted with Kashi's sacred geography.
Okay, so these maps reflected the realities of their times. But did they ever influence the actual physical development of Kashi? Did they ever inspire, like, the construction of new temples or the rerouting of pilgrimage paths?
It's a complex question, and one that scholars are still exploring. But it's safe to say that the relationship between the maps and the city was a dynamic one, a constant back and forth.
So rather than a simple cause and effect, it was more like a dance, with the maps and the city kind of shaping and influencing each other over time.
That's a great way to put it. The maps could have inspired the formalization of pilgrimage routes, or even encouraged the construction of new temples at sites deemed particularly significant. Conversely, the changing landscape of the city with new temples and altered routes would have then been reflected in subsequent maps.
It's like this feedback loop. The map influences the city influences the map, and so on.
And that dynamic interplay, that constant dialogue between representation and reality, makes this whole topic so fascinating.
It makes me wonder about the future of this relationship. Are we seeing contemporary examples of this interplay between the maps and the city? I'm thinking specifically about the Kashi Vishwanath Corridor project, which, as you mentioned, led to the rediscovery of several temples. Are those temples being incorporated into new maps? Are they influencing how people are experiencing Kashi today?
Oh, it's definitely happening. Those rediscovered temples are being integrated into both physical and digital maps. And the corridor itself, with its grand scale and symbolic importance, is becoming a prominent feature in visual representations of Kashi. It's almost like a new layer has been added to the city's sacred geography.
A layer that reflects both the city's ancient past and its ongoing transformation in the 21st century.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that even in a city as old and layered as Kashi, the process of mapping, reinterpreting, and experiencing the sacred is never truly finished. It's an ongoing conversation, a dynamic dance between belief, imagination, and the ever-changing realities of the world around us.
Well said. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. Ancient myths, contested spaces, the evolution of artistic styles, the impact of modern technology. It's been an incredible journey through time and belief, and I think we all gained a deeper appreciation for that multifaceted nature of Kashi and the power of these maps to illuminate its enduring appeal.
I agree. And what's truly remarkable is that even after centuries of study, Kashi continues to surprise us, to reveal new layers of meaning, to challenge our assumptions about the relationship between the eternal and the temporal.
It's a city that defies easy categorization, a place where the past, present, and future seem to converge, creating a space of both profound continuity and constant transformation.
And it's that very quality, that ability to hold seemingly contradictory ideas in tension, that makes Kashi such an enduring source of fascination and inspiration.
So to our listeners, if you ever find yourself with the opportunity to visit Kashi, I encourage you to go with an open mind and a curious heart. Don't just see the temples and the ghats. Feel the energy, listen to the stories, and allow yourself to be drawn into that city's unique rhythm.
And remember, your experience of Kashi doesn't have to be limited to a physical journey. Explore the maps, read the myths, delve into the history, allow yourself to be transported by the power of imagination. And you might just discover a piece of Kashi's eternity within yourself.
Beautifully said. This deep dive has been a true privilege. Thank you to our expert for sharing your insights and helping us navigate this fascinating and complex topic.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. May your own explorations be filled with wonder and discovery.